Hello and welcome to a new episode of Talking Law with me, Sally Penni MBE. I'm a barrister at Kenworthy's Chambers in Manchester, the Joint Vice Chair of the Association of Women Barristers and the founder of Women in the Law UK. A big thank you to Capsticks LLP for supporting this episode. Founded over 40 years ago, Capsticks is a leading UK law firm providing specialist legal advice to the health, housing, regulatory and social care sectors. They are a national full-service firm with 5 locations across the UK. Find out more at capsticks.com. Before today's conversation, I wanted to let you know about 2 new books I've written that are out now, available on Amazon. The first is Talking Law and Skills, which offers guidance on everything from negotiation skills to communication skills to career management skills to leadership to how to manage overwhelm. All the crucial skills we lawyers need as we return to in-person practice after COVID-19. I do hope that you will take a look and find it useful. The second book is called Where Are You From? A book created for children and adults which amplifies and celebrates 31 voices from Black British history. I'm passionate about ensuring that Black role models are visible for all, especially young people from all backgrounds. So please do support Where Are You From? It's available now on Amazon, just in time for Black History Month in October. Today I'm talking law with Paul McFarlane, an interview in which I discuss with him his 20 years experience of advising clients in the public sector. Paul is a partner at Capsticks and manages a team of lawyers providing the full range of employment law advice to health, police and emergency service clients. He is also hugely involved with Black Solicitors Network. I started by asking Paul why he chose to be a solicitor, and he revealed that entering the law was a surprise even for him.
Yeah, so unlike most of your guests I've listened to, who appear to have this drive and strive to be a lawyer from when they were very young, that was not me. I wanted to actually be an economist or a journalist, and I sort of fell into law because it was the only other A-level that I thought I'd be reasonably good at. I was studying economics and maths at college. I decided to do law as the third one, and it transpired that I was better at law than economics and maths, and so I decided that I'd go to one of the more stable professions rather than journalism, and I took a law degree at Middlesex University, and 30 odd years later we're still here.
Wow. And why solicitor and not barrister? I suppose it's a question that I'm interested in. But for, sometimes people can't decide, can't they? I always knew I wanted to come to the bar. Why did you choose?
Well, I knew if I was going to be a lawyer, it wouldn't be a barrister. I never felt that I wanted to be an advocate, and I didn't think that would play to my strengths. The advocacy side of things was not something that particularly appealed to me. So I went down the solicitor branch.
And also, why employment law? Because I noticed in my research, for example, you trained at TfL, which is London.
Yes, it was TfL now. Yes, right.
Yeah,
that's right,
TfL.
Yeah.
It wasn't then, I suppose. But
no.
but that is an interesting job. I've always been really curious about, what being a lawyer there must mean, apart from the usual sort of trade union issues, but deaths on the railway, there's all sorts that go on there. And so just help me, why employment law and not, for example, crime or commercial litigation or, chancery, for instance?
So going back to me starting at London Transport, obviously that wasn't my first choice. I spent 3 years looking for a training contract. It wasn't called a training contract in those days. It was actually called an article clerk, becoming an article clerk.
Yes.
Took me 3 years, over 400 applications, over 20 interviews. And then I saw an advert, I think it must have been the Law Society Gazette, for a position as a trainee at London Transport, as it was then. And it was, I thought, well, this is different. I wasn't thinking about in-house. I'd not even contemplated working in-house. And went there. The interview went really well. It was the first interview I actually felt that I was given an opportunity to express myself fully, and I felt comfortable. Anyway, I was offered the job, and it was a really interesting experience. As you say, it's quite different compared to working in private practice. So obviously no timesheets, etc. But they were quite innovative in terms of, this is in the early 90s, so computers were a new thing in terms of office work, and they were quite on board with that. And I spent I had 3 seats. So one was in property, or real estate, as they now call it these days, jazzed up names now.
Yes.
So I spent 8 months there, 8 months in commercial, and 8 months in litigation. But in my first seat in property, they needed somebody to sit on an employment tribunal case. And so they said, can you sit on it? So I sat there, and it's quite a famous case of an employment law. It's an indirect sex discrimination case called London Underground versus Edwards.
Yeah.
And it's all about how the change in rosters disproportionately affected women. And I was just fascinated. It just sort of gripped me. Just the employment tribunal environment, the way the case was presented, the law was quite interesting. And I knew then that if I was going to stay in the law, that it would be employment law. So that sort of, as a roundabout way, explains how I decided that employment law was going to be for me.
Well, it's interesting. And just going back to precisely how you started that by saying 3 years to get a training contract, as is now known, but to become an articled clerk. I mean, they still call it articles in some of the Commonwealth jurisdictions, don't they? Like Canada, for instance. Was that tough? Where did you find kind of the resilience? Long time to get pupillage, but it wasn't 3 years.
It was very tough. At times you sort of question, is this going to be, are you actually going to make it? Are you actually going to do it? But I think I'm a quite driven person, and I'm a person who's very determined. I should also say that I wouldn't be here without the support of my parents. I think that was really important in terms of they gave me emotional support. They couldn't give me support in terms of knowing what to do to try and get into the profession, but they certainly gave me lots of emotional support. And I was also quite lucky because my girlfriend, then now wife, she had obtained a training contract relatively easily compared to me, but she was very supportive. And I think it was with those support mechanisms that helped me keep going on and keep on applying and trying. And eventually it came good.
Yeah. Well, you've been in the law now. Gosh, I don't want to age you. I try not to be ageist on here, outing people's ages. Yeah.
So I'll tell you mine. I'm 53,
and half of that's been in law. So we're very lucky to have you. Do you think that they were some of the experiences that led you to become involved in Black Solicitors Network? And secondly, do you think that BSN is still necessary? And then perhaps, what is BSN for those who perhaps don't know what Black Solicitors Network is?
Okay, so the Black Solicitors Network was formed in 1995, and it promotes the interests of Black solicitors to provide professional support and information, inform and influence D&I, that's diversity and inclusion, best practice. And we also consult or engage with government and the Law Society and SRA in terms of dealing with any consultations that affect Black and minority ethnic solicitors. In terms of your question, in terms of my experiences and whether or not that informed my decision to become more active as a board director with BSN, definitely. I think for me, having gone through my journey in the law, I can see that there are things that I could have done differently, but there are also things that the professions need to do differently in order to enable black talent to both get a foot in the door to start off in the profession and then to achieve their best and make their way up through the ranks in the profession. And I think that's what the Black Solicitors Network strives to do.
And do you think it's still necessary? Because let me just paint a picture. We're post a re-emergence of Black Lives Matter, which always existed, of course, before George Floyd, but wasn't terribly known, and the sad death of George Floyd. And there is, much more now, a keenness for people to have those conversations about, well, what is the Black experience in the workplace and beyond? And so because we talk a lot about diversity, there's a feeling that, there's loads of Black lawyers, mainly because there's Black Solicitors Network, there's Black men in law, there's Black women in law, BAME of the bar, and a few others. So people think, the blacks, if you like, to coin a term, or the Black and BAME community are doing okay. So do you concur with that? Do you think the BSN is still necessary?
Definitely necessary. Just a few statistics. I don't like to talk about a lot of statistics, but I think it's important to put things into context. So the Law Society's figures in 2018 showed that approximately 40% of law undergraduates were from a Black and minority ethnic background, but only 16% of solicitors were from that background. So that then starts to ask questions, why is that drop off? What happens between taking a law degree and then the entry into the profession? Diversity league tables in 2017 showed that there were 10% of trainees in 2006 were trainees. Now that's increased to 22%. But then there's quite a lot of attrition. So only 13% were associates and then only 9% were partners. And again, one has to question, why are there these attrition rates? And I think in terms of race, the attrition rates are much more significant in terms of the drop-off from qualification to associate compared to women. And so I think it's vital that organisations like the BSN are here to help and assist our individual members, but also to work with our corporate members to enable them or assist them to utilise the Black talent that they have and also bring on Black talent.
Yes. And I wonder, Paul, I mean, it's right. And also then when you look at further up, of course, in the seniority ranks, appointment to be Queen's Counsel, appointment to the judicial bench, there's a statistics which came out recently from the Ministry of Justice that in 14 years had been a 1% increase. That is not good. And I know there are many people who've been working hard on those stats, and it can't be that Black lawyers are not as good as white lawyers or any of those sort of basic narratives at all. So there is something going on there. What's your view on kind of networks and advice to younger people? You said that your parents didn't know where you would go, but, on reflection, do you think things like networks, mentors, sponsors are some of the advice that perhaps you might give younger people, or indeed your younger self in progressing in law?
Yeah, I look back at my career as a series, not say errors, I think probably that might be too harsh on myself, but a situation where I didn't know what I needed to do in order to, one, first get into the profession, and two, then to move up into the profession. It's only through guidance and help from others that I have sort of made it to where I am. So in terms of networks, I think that's critical. When I started out, we didn't have organisations like the BSN. And I think as a result, I didn't really know where to go in terms of what information I needed to try and better my prospects of getting into the profession. There are now a number of organisations, including the BSN, who offer that facility to people from working class, black and minority ethnic backgrounds who probably are the first in their family who've gone to university. And so they just don't have that background, that connection, those contacts that can help them get a foot in the door. So, because I didn't really appreciate the need for experience or some work experience in law before going into trial or trying to get a law job. I was it was drummed into me that what was important was the qualifications. And the qualifications are important, but they're not enough. And that's something that I sort of drill into my children.
Yes. What about this, Paul? What would be your advice to young people?
I think 3 things I'd say is you need to have resilience. You're going to have knockbacks in whatever you do. If you look at, I always point to high achieving sports people. So, for example, Andy Murray. I'm quite a fan of his.
Yes, me too.
And even him, who's achieved a lot, he's had a lot of knockbacks. So you've got to have resilience and learn from each experience that you have. So that's one thing I would say. And I should just add on that point in terms of resilience that it helps if you've got a good and positive support mechanism around you. And hopefully that can come from your family. But if it's not from your family, then there are other networks like the BSN who can hopefully help and offer some support to you. I think when you're in work, do the best job. Each job, do your best and try and show those you're working with that you are doing your best so that they'll want to come back to you and give you more work going forward. And then the third thing is don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Put yourself in uncomfortable positions. It's really important that you do challenge yourself. So for me, you asked a question about advocacy. I knew I didn't want to be an advocate, but I knew to be an employment lawyer that I needed to do a lot more public speaking in terms of doing presentations, doing some advocacy, because you have to do some advocacy at preliminary hearings, etc.
Yeah.
And an early stage of my career, I decided that I was going to put myself forward to do these things. It wasn't something I wanted to do. It wasn't something I was naturally good at, but I thought I needed to put myself in those situations so that I'd be more comfortable doing it.
Yeah, so put yourself in the hot seat, if you like. Get out of your comfort zone. That's one of the famous quotes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But Paul, I wonder then, in your career to date, have you got a memorable case or a case that's meant a lot to you? Now, people often say it was my first ever case. In my case, it's one of them. I wonder if you've had a case that's kind of stuck with you in your really long career.
Yeah, I think the Edwards case is one that sticks with me because it made a big impression on me as a junior person. Because you asked a question about why employment law. I think for me it's 3 things. It's about people. I'm really interested in people. You maybe ask me about books in a minute and I might elaborate more about why I'm so interested in people. The other thing in that case that was quite interesting, it's quite technical in terms of the law around indirect sex discrimination wasn't as evolved then as it is now. And that case actually went all the way to the Court of Appeal. So I started out in 1993 seeing it at the Employment Tribunal and followed it through to the Court of Appeal. So it's quite a technical case. And And the third thing as well, which I liked about employment litigation, is compared to other types of civil litigation, it's quite fast. So, well, up until recently, with all the problems we're having with COVID and also resourcing issues in tribunals, tribunal cases tended to be heard within 6 to 12 months of being lodged with the tribunal, which is relatively fast compared to other types of litigation. So you could sort of focus on cases and then deal with them. They'd either settle or be heard, and then you'd move on. Rather than, during my training, I was involved in a piece of commercial litigation, which has been going on for over 9 years.
Oh gosh.
And I just thought that is not me.
No. And Paul, I want to ask you a bit about your favourite book and your favourite fictional lawyer, or whether that's on television or in books or Netflix, as we've all been sort of exposed to now as a result of lockdown. I have to say, I don't watch much telly, but the only time I have been watching them recently is because of the lockdown. So have you got a favourite book, and perhaps why?
I don't read any fiction.
Oh, right. Why is that?
I think true life is more interesting than fiction. I've just never really ever got into fiction.
Yes.
And back to a point I made earlier, I'm really interested in people. So in terms of books, I've got quite a lot of autobiographies and biographies,
right?
Because I like to know what makes people tick.
Yes.
And their flaws and what's made them get to where they've got to. So that is a real interest of mine. In terms of books, one of my first law books that I read when I was studying for my A-level law was a book by Harry Street. I think he's an academic at Manchester University, called Freedom, Individual and the Law. And that really did pique my interest in human rights law. So that's a book that I like, and I've really got a good interest in. But
I'll look it up.
And then fictional characters, probably I'm going to be obvious for somebody of around my generation. I'd say probably Rumpold.
Yes.
I found him quite an interesting and funny character.
Yes.
Obviously dated, and I heard your podcast with Martin Shaw.
Yeah.
Who said that they're looking about recreating Rumpold for the present generation. I think that would be a good idea.
Yes.
I'd like to think that we've moved on a bit since Rumpold, because at that stage I think there was the sort of one female barrister in chambers, and that was all a bit of a novelty, and all the other barristers couldn't cope with the fact that this other female barrister in chambers. I think things have moved on quite a bit.
Oh yes, certainly.
And so I'd like to hope that any new iteration of Rumpold will sort of reflect the world that we're in now compared to what it was then. Because I think people still have a view of lawyers being very stuffy.
Yeah.
And that's not my experience of most lawyers that I come into contact. You still do have the odd one or two that you think, are you back in the 1950s or 60s? But most of you are up to date, I think.
Well, yes. I should leave. Maybe I'll pose that question on Twitter. Are we up to date? Asked Paul McFarlane. Yes, I think in the main people are certainly trying to be, if they're not. Paul, can I ask you? Well, then, you yourself have written a book, haven't you? Which I discovered.
Yeah.
And you've written a lot of articles. Firstly, how did the book come about? And secondly, I want to talk about your work outside of the courtroom in D&I and outside of BSN. And, I read a really interesting article that was written about you actually in Forbes magazine, congratulations for getting in there, about the lawyer trying to work hard, to improve diversity and inclusion there. So firstly, how did the book come about? What's it called? How can people get it? And secondly, why are you writing and doing the extra stuff outside of the courtroom?
Right. So the book sort of is a evolution from the various articles I've written on employment law and policy issues over the years. And I was approached by a journalist about whether or not I'd be interested in writing a book. And I thought, yes, I would. And I thought, when was this? 2019? There were a lot of race issues going on there. So I thought it'd be topical to write a book on 20 questions that HR wanted answered on race. That was the title of the book. It's an ebook, not. I haven't got a physical copy, but
I know.
Can get it on Amazon.
I have ordered it. It needs to be in Audible. Listen.
I'm not sure they want to hear my dulcet tones.
Oh yes.
But so that's where the book came from. In terms of the writing, so that probably goes back to me wanting to be a journalist, and I like writing. I'm really interested in employment law and employment policy. And that sort of dovetails into your point around D&I. I am really passionate about trying to make the workplace more diverse and inclusive for people like me. So somebody who is the first generation from my family in this country who went to university. Black, my parents are working class, and my mum was a psychiatric nurse for over 40 years in the NHS. My dad was originally an engineer, and then he was a cabbie. And they come from the Caribbean, so my parents are both from Jamaica.
Yeah.
And I'm really passionate about trying to make sure that people from those sorts of backgrounds have the chance to achieve their best in whatever profession that they want to go into, and not to have the obstacles that I faced. I think they'll have obstacles. I think we all have obstacles, but I don't think they need to have as many. And I don't need to feel as daunted about going into professions as I did.
Yes.
So that's where it all comes from.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, you're quite successful, Paul. You could just sit back and enjoy the success, as many lawyers in the city and around the country and globally choose to do. Or you could choose to make it harder for people coming up. And again, as some people in our professions choose to do, that it was tough for them, so it should be tough for you, and that's how you learn resilience, and that's how you come through. I don't agree with that. I ought to declare that, and I don't think you do either. But it's interesting that actually you've chosen to say, look, we can make this better, and you don't want to see the same things, which is quite interesting. So what would be your kind of top tips then for progressing? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Networks are really important. Networking, both internally and externally, with your colleagues and with clients. And this is a difficult one in terms of, this is where firms can be better in terms of making sure that their black lawyers have exposure to clients at an early stage. I think that's really important. But part of the issue around there is making sure that the senior people within firms are more exposed to black lawyers. So lots of firms now and lots of organisations now are running reverse mentoring initiatives. And I think those initiatives are really important in terms of the senior leaders getting an understanding of what it is that the junior black lawyers have had to face in their careers, because a lot of them, for no fault of their own, they're just not alive to any of these issues, and so because they're not exposed to it, it's not a reality for them, and so they have no understanding about those things, and so the more that they do have an understanding about the sorts of issues that we've had to face, I think a lot of people be more sympathetic and more encouraging and try and be of more assistance. So I think that's really important.
Really interesting. And we ought to say the city firms are doing stuff, this bridge the gap. I've been helping them do stuff, even Mishcons and loads. I don't know about all of them, but you're right. And I think reverse mentoring is good. But even from simple things like, please don't touch my hair. Being treated as though the people are pets and dealing with some of those still existing discriminatory issues. It's just good to have the exposure in the conversations. Paul, let me ask you about well-being. Well-being is one of the things we're not good at. And particularly in law, it is long hours. I get a late brief and I'm preparing a trial all night, and that involves coffee. Do you go to yoga class? No. You're preparing constantly. Now, with better thinking and organisation, of course, I'm much better and I go to the gym, but not all the time. But I've noticed that actually you are a very keen runner. I mean, because how many marathons have you done and halves?
Yeah, I'd probably put it not so much in the past tense, but I wouldn't say I'm as keen a runner as I was. So I've run 5 marathons.
Well, yes, but you're running.
I've run 5 marathons, but my last marathon was in 2016.
Wow. But you still run long distances.
Yeah, still run.
And so I wonder if that has been one of the ways you deal with your well-being in the law, is it? And what other ways, or would you like to deal with well-being and mental health? Some of the issues perhaps that we're trying to get better at talking about or dealing with. What do you do for your well-being aside from the running?
So I think running's been really important for me. I started running in 2005. I've always been someone who's done exercise and sport.
Yes.
But I wanted to run a marathon. I felt I could run a marathon. So I started in 2005 and I did my first London in 2008. And actually I found it really helpful in a number of respects. It was sort of time to myself.
Yeah.
Time when I could sort of clear my head.
Yes.
But also when you go out for a long run, initially when I was running by myself, it just gave me some clear thinking space. So problems that I had, I could think about whilst on the run and come up with some solutions. And so that was helpful. In 2008 or 9, I can't remember now. No, 2010. 2010, I joined the running club, and that was really good for me because I got to meet other people. They were able to help in terms of progressing my running, etc.
Yeah.
But also when you're going on the long runs, wouldn't be running fast on long runs. We could have a chat completely. I mean, they knew I was a lawyer, but we didn't talk about law. We didn't talk about whatever they did. We might talk about our children. We might talk about all sorts of things, but not necessarily about work. So again, time away from the day job. And I really enjoy it. So even last night, we had our first social for our running club since the pandemic. And it was just nice to catch up with lots of people who I haven't seen for over 18 months. So running has been definitely something that has helped me in terms of well-being. But it's also helped in my work. So doing a marathon is, as I say, a marathon is not a sprint. It's a long journey.
It's a bit like the law.
Yeah, well, like dealing with big cases. Because what I found with a marathon is that the only way to do a marathon is to split it up into very small chunks and only think about that chunk that you've got ahead of you, don't try and think about the end goal, because if you think about the end goal, you'll not get there. But just think about the next, in my case, the next 5K, just the first 5K, then the next 5K, and I'd give myself a treat at the end of each 5K, like a drink or some sweets or whatever. And it's a bit like a case. You've got to think about, right, what are the issues now? I need to focus on this issue, these witnesses, deal with that, then the next issue, the next witnesses, and then if there's any bits that need to be joined up, then you can sort of see those things. But if you just think about the whole 20-day case, it's not going to work. So I found running really helpful for me in terms of well-being and also work.
Yes, quite. So, Paul, tell me, we know that your wife is also a lawyer. So 2 lawyers in one household. Crikey, is she still practicing?
Yeah, but we've got a rule. We've had a rule since we started going out that there's no law talk in our house.
What? Not even the COVID rules. I'll have to tell Adam Wagner.
No law talk. No. I was very serious about that. She does housing law. I've got no interest in housing law. I've got absolutely not interested at all.
Yeah.
She might be interested in employment law, but I don't want to be talking about employment law when I'm at home. I just want to switch off. We might talk about people.
Yeah.
And
totally.
issues we've had with people in the workplace, but not law. No.
So tell me, Paul, a dear friend of yours or ours died unexpectedly and suddenly. And you can tell everyone his name. And I'd like to dedicate this podcast to him because he was such a lovely gentleman who always made you feel so comfortable and at ease. From my point of view, whenever I was in London or, whether awards or whatever, lectures. Stephen, and I was thinking if Stephen was listening to this podcast, he'd probably ask what's next. So firstly, can you tell us a little bit more about Stephen?
So Stephen is Stephen Friday. He is a true inspiration. I met Stephen when roughly about the same time as I met my wife. Again, she wasn't my wife then. She and he were board directors of the African Caribbean Lawyers Association, which is a forerunner to the BSN, in the very early 1990s. And he always wanted to try and make sure that the generation coming behind us didn't have it so hard in terms of both getting into profession and then achieving their best when they were in it. Stephen was a partner in a North London law firm. I think he practiced probate and family law, I think, but don't quote me on that. But he was very, as you said, very kind-hearted. Someone who always enjoyed life. I mean, he always had a smile on his face. He was always trying to encourage people to do their best. He wasn't someone who took himself too seriously as well. He was a very generous person of spirit. I didn't realise until his funeral that he did so much outside of the law as well. I think he was a governor at a school. He did some various other projects locally in his local region. He was just such a lovely man, and I think he was one of the people that encouraged me to become a board director of the BSN. And yeah, if I could do half the things that he did, I'd feel very pleased.
He is sadly missed, and as a leader, he wasn't a sort of shouty man, was he?
No.
His leadership style was very much kind and gentle.
He was somebody who was under the radar. you didn't really know. Well, if you didn't know him, you didn't know what he was doing, but he was doing so much.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, he wasn't someone who was looking for any accolades or applause for what he was doing. He was just quietly getting on with trying to make things better.
Yes, yes. Well, that's why I wanted to talk about him, really. You know, he'd probably never come on the podcast if I'd asked him, say, oh, no, I'm too busy just doing this stuff. But he's very much missed by all of us. Paul, what's next? And that was the question I was alluding to. You know, Stephen will probably say, what's next? Have you thought about the bench? Because, you know, Lord Reid is keen to see a more diverse Supreme Court in the 6 years before he retires. He said that publicly, so everyone's seen that interview. Is it books? Is it House of Lords? I know you're very keen on, changing policy and, you know, D&I. But just for a moment, I don't want you to exclude yourself from anything, but... Or is it all of those? I don't know, but I wonder what's next for Paul McFarlane.
So for me, it's definitely not the bench. I did, when I was in my early 40s, apply to become a part-time employment judge, and wasn't successful. But I'm actually, in retrospect, quite pleased about that, because I don't think the bench suits my personality. It's not something that I'm sort of driven. I think to be a judge, you need to have a love for the law. I would say that I like what I do. I really enjoy what I do, but I wouldn't say I love it. And I think there's a difference. To be a good judge, I think you can be an effective judge without loving it, but I think to be a good judge, you do actually need to love the law. And I can't say that's me, because I've told you that my starting point was I didn't want to be a lawyer. It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't my first choice. In terms of my future direction, I think it's focused at the moment with Capsticks. I've really enjoyed my 2 years with them. I can see we're building a really great practice in the employment team, and the firm is very well managed and very well structured.
Yes.
And I can see where I fit into that. So my immediate focus is to sort of build the emergency services employment law practice, which I'm doing with a number of others within the employment team. Beyond that, who knows? I mean, as you say, there might be other things. I mean, I'm deputy chair of the Employment Law Association. I'm a trustee with a Citizen Advice Bureau. And so I'm interested in that sort of thing, governance of organisations. And also, as you said, writing, and what you're doing, podcasts. And I keep on saying that one day I want to turn my attention to doing a podcast on policy employment law issues. So who knows? That might be something in the future, but it's not an immediate goal for me, but it's certainly something I'm thinking about going forward.
Yes. Well, I hope you do it. You know, I hope I'm an effective mentor when I mentor several women and men, because I do go back and say, what have you done since we had the conversation? So I look forward at some stage to saying, well, right, Paul, this time next year, where is that podcast? It would be never ending, of course, given the employment law. And of course, I've just written a book on employment rights, post-COVID litigation. So there's a whole load of other areas there. So, Paul, before we finish, I'd just like to know what Capsticks are doing in the diversity and inclusion space, because it's really exciting some of the stuff you've been doing and the embracing that they have. A lot of firms talk the talk, but they don't actually walk the walk. They have glossy policies, but there's a difference, isn't there, than having policies that tick a box and actually embracing the idea of diversity and inclusion for everybody.
Yeah, so we've done quite a lot in the 2 years I've been here, but that's sort of culminating in the firm producing a diversity and inclusion strategy. And that includes setting targets for partnership, both salaried and equity, for women and black and minority ethnic lawyers. The firm recently set up employee engagement groups for ethnicity, LGBTQ plus, and disability. And again, those network groups are meant to sort of feed into the work that the firm is trying to do around achieving its targets. And we've also commissioned an inclusion survey across the firm, and we're currently looking at the results of that survey again to inform the work that we need to do in terms of meeting the targets we've set ourselves. We've set ourselves a 4-year target in terms of what numbers we want to get in terms of partners for black and women lawyers across the firm, and we want to use that survey to help us start to shape the work we need to do on that as regards meeting those targets. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on.
Yes.
And I would say also that what's really pleased me is the senior leadership's really embracing the need to become more diverse and inclusive. We've done work, but they're not complacent about things. They're really engaged in this subject and want to make sure that we utilise the talent we've got, and ensure that all of our lawyers achieve the best that they can.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to see, and I hope more firms take note, do the same or similar work as you've been doing. Paul, it's been really exciting and interesting talking to you. You didn't tell us if you could give us one of your biographies, given you don't read fiction, which one would it be? Don't say Nelson Mandela, because I think Harold Braco said that.
No, I won't.
Hillary Clinton. I'm trying to remember, there's so many episodes. But I wonder, if I was thinking, right, what would be, I need a bit of inspiration, it's coming up to 21 years at the bar. Whether you've got a favorite book that you would say to me or somebody else or somebody like me, that would be a good. Oh, yeah, you're thinking.
Inspirational. I mean, I'm thinking. I mean, people I found really interesting. So, for me, Alex Higgins is a very interesting person in terms of his background, where he came up from. He's one of these flawed geniuses. And that character, it's not me. I certainly am not a flawed genius. Well, I don't think I am. But he's very interesting. And then slightly more cerebral is Mike Brearley, who's a former England captain, cricket captain. I'm a big cricket fan. My dad's a big cricket man, and I sort of followed him into that. And I love cricket. So Mike Brearley and Viv Richards. Viv Richards is probably my hero in terms of growing up and watching him bat and destroying England and all the other teams. So I think Viv Richards would be the autobiography. I don't necessarily recommend it for you, Sally, but for me that would be the book I like reading.
And so, Paul, I know we are finishing, and I meant to ask you, and you alluded to it before. Your parents are from Jamaica, and your surname is McFarlane. And for my own father, in his career, he would often go to interviews, and of course, he suffered a lot of direct discrimination or racism because the name Penny did not accord with the black man standing in the room, however able he was. And I've written a children's book actually called Where Are You From? And it's all about heritage and it's about Black British history. So I wondered, how important is it for you? And do you get asked a lot, oh, where's your name from? Because it sounds like a Scottish name. Do you then have to explain kind of, slave trade, all of that? Or are you just quite authentically just Paul McFarlane in your own way?
I don't think it's been many times that people have asked me where does the name come from. It has on occasion, but it's not something that has been frequent.
Yes.
I mean, it's quite funny that I'm going to hopefully going to Scotland for the first time in my life in just over a week's time.
Great.
I'm going to Edinburgh with my wife and my daughter. And I'm really, really quite excited about it. Obviously, there is some heritage in terms of the name McFarlane. It comes from there. I don't know where. I have not sort of researched it to find out where originally it comes from. Maybe that's something I should do while I'm up there. But yeah, it's not. I've never faced issues around name. What I have faced in the past is, and this is before the internet, so forgive some of your younger viewers because they won't understand this. So when you used to work and you would be in dialogue with colleagues or with clients who'd not seen you, and then you turn up to a meeting, and as you go, usually with a meeting, you do sort of round the room introducing yourselves, and so I'd introduce myself, and I'd never forget, there's one meeting I had at Royal Mail, and I've been working with this person for about 6 months. So I'd not met them, and they'd not met me. And there's a meeting of about 15 of us, and then went round the room and said my name, and I could just see this woman's face, like shock horror. Is that him? It really struck me, and I'm not the only person to have experienced that. I've spoken to my wife, and she's had that sort of experience as well. So I know it's not just me. So I've had that, but I've not had anything about my name directly.
Minority students changing their name so they're more anglicised because they don't get employment, and the moment they kind of change it, they get umpteen interviews. Chinese students often used to have the same thing, but and so it's just quite interesting. It's an authenticity point where young students say, "Oh, shall I change my name? Shall I try to be somebody else?" All this sort of thing. And I always say, there's only one you. Everyone else is taken. But the realities can be quite
hard. Yeah. I mean, I it's not something I would encourage, but I can see why some people might do it because for an easier life. But it's not something I would advocate.
Yes. Well, Paul, it's been wonderful having you here. Thank you for being a guest on the podcast. I hope you'll come back to tell me about what you've been doing on your own podcast in due course.
No, it's been a pleasure, Sally. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope I've been able to provide some helpful information to your younger listeners. We'll speak and meet again.
A big thank you to Paul McFarlane for talking law with me, Sally Penni MBE. Thanks again to Capsticks for supporting this episode. Do visit capsticks.com to find out more about the firm. If you would like to support Talking Law, then please do get in touch. You can find me on Twitter @SallyPenny1 or search for Sally Penni or Women in the Law UK on LinkedIn or on Instagram. Do give me a follow. You can catch up with our previous episodes of Talking Law where you can hear interviews with guests such as immigration expert Gary McKindo and Paralympian Baroness Tanni Gray Thompson, amongst many others. Bye for now.